Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I am one of your hosts, Bryant, here for a Podicus Magnus episode. It's Friday. You're ready for it. Peter's here.
Yay!
So's
Hello,
Cammy.
Peter.
Oh,
Hi.
there she is.
Hi, everyone.
Couldn't wait for me to introduce you, could you?
Nope.
She's very excited.
You called me a host last time, so
Right, yeah.
riding on
You know,
that wave.
I'm reading. I like to every summer. It's becoming a thing now. I like to listen to Agatha Christie Poirot books, and they use the word ejaculate a lot, but it's more of like a interjection.
Right.
So,
right.
but they'll. So I was about to say that you ejaculated there. You were like, I didn't introduce you. You ejaculated. You came into the conversation. So, welcome.
Exploding onto the scene.
All right, so Mythstorie. Let me explain what this show is, because you're extremely confused by now. This is the first episode.
They've just
Yeah.
turned it off.
And Apple, please don't flag us. I think we're explicit already. Mythstorie with an IE. We're here to talk about myths and history. Every week we pick a random topic, subject, myth, legend, John Henry story, what have you, and we give it to you in a fun way, and then we'll kind of talk about the history behind it. And these special Podicus Magnus episodes, we have our third wheel, Peter, join us for our tricycle of fun.
I love that.
I was really proud of that too. I'm on a
wheel
roll
of fun.
Yeah. So we've got another. I'll tear this Band-Aid off. We're in Greece. I know some of you might be like, oh gosh, Greek. I don't know. But
Again.
yeah. But this is a great companion episode to last week, because it's all about punishment and hell. So it's just so nice to talk about during this wonderful pandemic where we're all social distancing and stuck in loops of being at home.
We are all in Tartarus right now.
Yeah, essentially. So can Peter, will you remind us a little bit what we talked about last week?
Last week we talked about Tantalus and Sisyphus, and during our After Dark program, I read from Virgil's Aeneid, and that talked about the underworld as well. So we're having a underworld smorgasbord. Yeah,
great. So and now today we're going on with that theme. Cammy, will you introduce will you pronounce these words for us? These fun Greek words.
They're not hard. We're going to talk about the story of Orpheus and Eurydice.
Fantastic. So this is, and I'm excited because I literally don't know this story. I mean, I kind of do because of the research I've done, but this is the first time I've kind of got into it. The only time I knew Orpheus was the Venture Brothers character. So shout out to anyone who understands that.
See, Bryant never does his homework. He never does the reading. So he's a nice stand-in for.
How do you think I got into grad school?
Comes in with the cliff notes.
Have to do the reading on this exactly.
You're right. Yeah.
Just a base knowledge is fine for the history part, I think.
Right. Yeah. No, it's cool. I'll talk a little bit about Tartarus and pain and suffering and misery, just by personal experience. But
grad school.
Yeah, that's about it. So, well, excellent. Peter, I believe, is going to kick it off on the Orpheus and Eurydice tale.
Yes, I am. So, since ancient times, it's been a tradition to invoke the muses at the beginning of any creative endeavor. So it's only proper that we ask them to bless this, our humble podcast. Muses! You're stepping on my line, dude.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, muses, daughters 9 of the powerful god Zeus, daughter of Mnemosyne, Titan goddess of memory. From you, all art, music, and poetry flow down to us like a sweet breeze across a fertile meadow. Your influence fills our hearts and minds with imagination as a steady breath kindles a spark into a raging fire. You inspire us. Imagine, thank you. Imagine being the child of a muse, having that much innate creative power and talent. Such a man was Orpheus, son of Apollo and Calliope, the muse of epic poetry. Orpheus became known as the father of songs. While the god Hermes had created the lyre, the yoke-shaped harp, Orpheus was said to have perfected it. Orpheus's music even had the power to save lives. While accompanying Jason on his quest for the Golden Fleece, Orpheus saved his fellow Argonauts from ruin by outsinging the sirens, whose intoxicating songs drew sailors to wreck and ruin. In time, Orpheus came to love the nymph Eurydice, and finally the day of their wedding had arrived. It was a beautiful day and the hills were in bloom. Naiads, the nymphs of the water, had emerged from a nearby stream to dance with the newlyweds. But all was not right, as an unwelcome guest slithered its way towards the celebration. Eurydice, twirling as she danced, stepped on the tail of a serpent. It sank its teeth into her heel, and its poison went straight into her fluttering heart, stopping it dead. The winged god Hymen, blesser of weddings, held his sacred torch above the fallen bride. The flame of his torch was said to ensure a long and fruitful marriage, but on this day it would only ignite Eurydice's funeral pyre. Orpheus mourned for his fallen bride for many days, and his songs of lament pierced the very heavens. Finally, he undertook to journey to the underworld in an attempt to win back his lover. Near the town of Peloponnesus, there was rumored to be a gate to the underworld, and Orpheus set out to discover it. He found the Taenarian gate beneath a great outcropping of rock on a mountainside. A cold wind seemed to breathe in and out of the mouth of the cave, both drawing in the young poet and then repelling him. As he descended into the darkness, Orpheus passed by thin shadows, spirits of those who had not received a proper burial. They must wait on the banks of the river Styx for 100 years before they may cross. These are the Stygian realms, where the river stands like a black mirror, reflecting in the dim light the jagged, jutting ceiling of black rock. Charon, the grim boatman, stands on the prow of his brittle skiff and silently chooses the spirits who are allowed to cross with a point from his bony finger. After a long and perilous journey, Orpheus at last came to the great throne room of Hades and Persephone. The two gods, lords of the underworld, reclined on a couch that appeared to have grown out of the very floor of the great cavern. Their encrusted throne bristled with the spires of stalagmites and glistened with the hidden gems of the deep earth. As Orpheus stood at the feet of the looming gods, the eternal couple waited silently for him to speak. But speak he did not. Orpheus cradled his lyre in the crook of one arm, lightly strummed the strings and began to sing. His song did not deceive with winning words, but spoke of the painful truths of love. He sang of his journey through the underworld, not as a sightseer, but as a wife-seeker, how his love was so strong that it made mourning impossible. He sang of the love between Hades and Persephone, a love so strong and terrible that it threatened to freeze the earth in eternal winter. He sang of the Moirae, the three goddesses of fate, how Clotho spun the thread of Eurydice's life, how Lachesis measured it carefully, and how Atropos cut it tragically short. Perhaps Eurydice's thread could be mended once again. After all, our thread of life is like a leash that will eventually draw us home again, here beneath the earth. As he sang, water dripped down the dark walls like tears. Tantalus forgot his hunger, thirst, and desire, and paused to listen. Ixion's wheel slowed, and for a moment he knew no torment. Sisyphus paused on his hillside and leaned against his rock for a spell. and the Furies, the great tormentors of Tartarus, shed their first tears. The song of Orpheus had stunned the entire underworld into silence, and it had moved the hearts of its masters. Hades called for Eurydice to be brought back to Orpheus. It may take time, he warned, as she walked slowly due to her wounded ankle. Orpheus must lead her out of the underworld, but he must not look back until they both emerged from the great crater of Avernus and bathed in the light of the sun once again. Slowly, silently, Orpheus makes his way back to the surface. Eurydice does not speak, but Orpheus can hear her light footsteps on the pathway behind him. Orpheus begins to grow anxious. Is it truly Eurydice behind me, or is this a trick of the gods? Why does she not answer me or join me in song? Finally, Orpheus sees the light of the surface. They are nearly to Avernus. Orpheus quickens his step, forgetting that Eurydice still suffers from her wounded ankle. As soon as he steps into the sunlight, Orpheus turns to look at his bride. He sees her there, cloaked in shadows, her beauty still as fresh as upon their wedding day. But their reunion lasts but an instant. Swiftly, Eurydice is drawn back as though pulled by a leash. Never turning, her eyes stay fixed on Orpheus as she recedes back into the darkness and disappears. Her final farewell to him is drowned in echoes as she is pulled deep into the yawning tunnel. Shattered at losing his wife a second time, Orpheus wanders the underworld in a stunned stupor. Charon, the boatman, will not let him cross again. Orpheus mourns at the banks of the river Styx for 7 days, neither eating nor drinking. Finally, he makes his way back to the surface and the land of the living. 3 years pass, and many women burn with passion for the beautiful young poet. But Orpheus flees from the love of women. Atop a barren hilltop, Orpheus begins a new song. As he plays, a grove of trees grows up around him. The trunks of trees encircle him, protecting him from the world, just as the poet had built a fortress around his own broken heart. The end.
Oh, whoa.
That is
Fantastic.
very beautiful, Peter.
That was. Poor
I had a lot of
Orpheus.
fun with that.
Yeah.
So I used Ovid's Metamorphosis as the basis for this story.
Cool.
But there's not a ton of imagery. He's got some beautiful language. So I had to kind of fill in some of the blanks to flesh it out a little bit. It's a lot of fun.
That's great. Hopefully his legal team isn't still around
Yeah.
to nail us.
We've got us
I
on
don't
Tinder.
Oh, no, that was excellent. That really is really great. Well, fantastic. Cammy, hit it.
Yes. I'm also using Ovid's Metamorphosis. Peter and I thought it would make more sense if we were using the same source for this. And I'm using the Charles Martin translation. Orpheus has journeyed throughout the lands, enchanting beast and men alike. Even the trees follow his song. Still deep in his breast, the loss of his love fills him with the now dull ache that was almost flame before. He still, many years later, could not bear to know the silky touch of a female lover. One day, during his travels, he came upon the people of Bacchus, red-haired women dressed in the pelts of the animals they had slain in hedonistic ritual. Orpheus did not see his foes, even as they cried out in harsh mockery. It was soon that these women went to battle against the minstrel, angry that he would not take them or any woman as a lover. One of the group threw a wicked lance, but the vines, so enchanted by Orpheus's music and his sweet song, wrapped around the weapon and carried it quickly to the forest floor. She then picked up a stone, but our hero could charm even rock, and it fell short. The worshippers of Bacchus were now enraged that no weapon could harm this mortal. They began to play their flutes and horns of beast and dinning drums, so out of rhythm and out of tune that it filled the forest air with eerie unease. They began to cast the stones again. having made them deaf to Orpheus's magic. The grass below the poet, now dark with bloody stones. The animals were driven off by the strange noise the women made as Orpheus fell silent. These witches now surrounded the enchanting man and dug their bare hands into his flesh, tearing it from the bone. Their madness didn't end with one man's blood. They quickly spotted several men working oxen in a nearby field, and they went after them. The men fled in terror, leaving their oxen to the fate of Orpheus. When the fury had lifted, Orpheus's ghost rose from his body. The animals gathered once again to mourn their friend. The trees turned gray in reverence or sadness. Even the stones grieved his passing. His body in pieces scattered throughout the woods, his head and lyre tossed to the sea. A lucky snake found the head, but just as he was unhinging his jaw to swallow his meal, Apollo himself came down and turned the snake's jaw to stone. Orpheus, now aware of his condition, sank below to the Elysian fields, where he found his love Eurydice, and now, until the end of time, they can look upon each other, no matter who leads the path.
Oh,
That's what I have. But also, if you go a little bit further into Ovid, so this is from the beginning of Book 11, the Bacchidae, who attacked Orpheus, did not go unpunished. For when Bacchus heard of their murderous foray, he turned them into the oak tree that we see today for their crimes.
Oh.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cammy, that was your best script ever. That was really good.
Really? It was so short.
But it was descriptive. It was great.
It was great. It was
some really great set pieces. I loved it.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I mean, I knew that he had been like killed by the Bacchidae, but I didn't know kind of the specifics of it at all. So you really kind of brought that part of his story to life. And I like how he's reunited with Eurydice at the end. It's very nice.
Yeah. Yeah, that is really cool.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
I'd
so
also,
go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to draw attention. Like, it was remarkable to me, like how much attention, particularly in Ovid, there is on Orpheus, but how, like, you know, Eurydice has like no introduction at all. Like, I had to really dig to find anything on her.
Yeah.
And so she's just kind of a shell of a character. And then we have the Bacchidae, who are just these like mad women. It's like when the depiction of women in this poem is not very not super positive.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah, it's a brave new world for you girls.
Ancient Greek world. You know, it's funny. So I looked a little bit into Orpheus and Eurydice, and sort of their origins. Again, I kind of wanted to focus on Tartarus and Journal, just kind of going on, but it looks like there's people sort of posit that Eurydice was added essentially, or was not really added. She was a later figure. Orpheus is pretty well established in ancient story, and it said he was either like the son of Apollo or was son of like an old king of Thrace, and so it like his exploits and his journeys and fame as a epic poet or musician are very well known. But then the Eurydice, it's kind of believed, was a little later. I mean, but it still is. I mean, there's stuff from the fifth, like tapestry from the 5th and 6th century that features them together, and I guess because she was clung to it. To his story, it helped her kind of gain popularity, but that might be why she's not as obvious to find information on, because it looks like she was sort of added later to the story, interestingly enough. But she is included. I mean, the big guys, Ovid and Virgil, both they talk about Tartarus, but like she's Orpheus, that you don't, when you get to that later point, she's there with him. So going into further research on Tartarus and kind of Greek views of death and punishment is really interesting, because it really goes down to the more like the Christianization changed a lot of things in a lot of ways. But the cool thing is there's sort of the ancient Greek idea is still kind of maintained. Tartarus, though, specifically is in like the mythology is what's kind of believed as a primordial being. So just sort of one of the things that was when things began, along with like Gaia, Earth. But eventually, like Tartarus, its meaning changed. Eventually, it was more of like a physical place. I don't really know exactly when that sort of happened, but I guess like by the time we see it in literature, it's certainly these infernal regions, as it's kind of referenced. And it specifically was there to originally lock Titans, and then eventually it was there to specifically lock otherworld, like non-mortals. But then eventually, even then, it grew to sort of be the antithesis of Elysium, which is sort of like paradise. So it's very, I don't know, it's very interesting. But yeah, Pluto or Hades is the one who sort of oversees it. People are essentially sort of stuck there, and I just find it interesting because like I see that Tartarus is like in Hesiod's Theogony. Tartarus is, that's where the explanation as a primordial figure, but it's he's not like a god or a titan. It's like an elemental being originally that eventually transforms into this place. In fact, like I saw, it was Britannica that specifically there's writings that describe Tartarus as being an inverted dome. At first it had like two sections, but then it just eventually became this inverted dome, this a cosmic sphere that just divide that where Earth is in between, essentially like heaven and Earth and Tartarus. So that kind of gives me some like Dante's Inferno levels of being in there. So
yeah, that must be a later like Christian.
Possibly, yeah. Well, that's Hesiod's Theogony also kind of talks about that, the physical sort of nature of it.
Oh, okay.
I want to say that like I think one of our kind of modern obsession with like the Greek underworld is like there are clear parallels between like popular Christian depictions of hell with Tartarus essentially, and you see that like you mentioned Dante, Dante's Inferno. Some of the characters that Dante encounters are from like are from Greek myth, like Arachne is there, like so it's not, it seems very logical that this ancient Greek and then Roman and then Christian, it's all the same stuff,
Yeah.
at least in our popular imagining of what it looks like, what it's
Yeah. One big thing, like there's always been, I think this kind of still rings true, that in Greek mythology, the death was a journey. It wasn't the end. And I think that's like, it sounds so weird that these people like Orpheus and they're able, so many people are able to travel. Odysseus traveled to hate, like, it was a place you could go. It was a physical place, but your soul was the place, was the vessel that traveled it. It wasn't Disney World though, but
yeah, I was thinking like, prime vacation spot.
Right, yeah. We're going
on
to
the
Tartarus.
banks of the river Styx.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily
the torture.
It's not a permanent resting place. Like, the Virgil that I was reading earlier this week, Aeneas is down there and he sees these people who, these spirits who've been there for like 1,000 years and they're ready to rejoin the land of the living, like essentially be reincarnated. And he's looking at people who will be, this man in the underworld will become this great figure in Roman history. Like it's not necessarily where you go, like it's like a stopover.
Sure, yeah. And so I didn't get to read too much of it, unfortunately, because the article was locked. But I read the abstract. It's this article called "Death and Grief in the Greek Culture." It's got a few authors that are they look Greek, so I'm not. I don't know if I want to butcher those names. But they sort of talk about how the journey of the soul, and how that idea really stayed the same through the Christianization of this area, and of the Greeks. It just, the way that the dead were mourned kind of changed, and the way that burial processes changed. I mean, there is a big idea of especially in ancient Christianity, of like making sure your body was in a good position when it was buried, so that way, when Judgment Day came, when you popped out, you were good. So, but even then, it was still like death wasn't the end; it was all a part of the journey. It just, I guess, like resurrection was just sort of added to the idea, but it was still a matter of, but your soul will be there. Your soul's moving on. You're going to be good. Eventually, you go to your body, but it's about your soul and kind of that focus on it. So I wish I could have read the whole thing, but I can't. I couldn't get access, and I didn't want to pay $40. Yeah, I really liked that. Also, Roman mythology sort of changed it. Virgil, I mentioned, he wrote on it, and it was a very in the Aeneid, he describes it as a gigantic place. It's like flaming rivers. It locks you in. Again, we're thinking like almost like Dante's Inferno style of like physical punishment. The Hydra guards it. It's very like fire, like the fire and brimstone versions of hell that we have. This is really it. And so it looks like for them though, it's just about containing the sinners. It doesn't really mention like there's a specific place for the Titans. There's specific places for the people, non-mortals and things like that. But it's extremely similar to the Greek style, just with the very fire and brimstone kind of focus on describing it. And the last cool kind of reference to Tartarus that I found was in biblical pseudepigrapha, is what it's called. This is a little Wikipedia section here that did a great job of discussing it. So Jewish pseudepigrapha and Jewish apocrypha, mainly from like in the form of the book of Enoch. Tartarus is actually explained in this. So this is like the Hellenistic Jewish literature from ancient Greece. And it would make sense that they would mention Tartarus. And here it's understood from these writings that it is the place where 200 fallen angels are imprisoned. So it has a very specific role here. But it's mentioned further beyond that too. I can't, like, the Book of Enoch's really complicated, and it's kind of hard to go down beyond that. But it also has sort of section things.
It Book of Enoch might be a good future Podicus Magnus.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot really going on there.
And Bryant and I were discussing kind of the Jewish connection before we started today. We talk a lot about mythemes on this podcast, about things that just seem to appear over and over again all over the world, and this idea of like not looking back, like where Orpheus is cautioned, like, don't turn around until you're out, and we see that again in the Old Testament with Lot and Lot's wife, turning into a pillar of salt. And I thought that was kind of interesting, and I wanted to do some more research about like don't look back myths, but I didn't have time.
Yeah. No, I absolutely get that. Yeah, there it is. Looking into, like, I kind of looked at the Britannica article and Wikipedia articles on Eurydice just to kind of get myself in a little bit, but there's clear parallels to Cammy and I have done we did a Japanese creation myth talking of Izanagi and Izanami creating the world, and even there's a Mayan myth of Izamna and Ixchel, as well as an Indian myth, and other myths where there are these biblical kind of these love stories of the loved one taken away, having to go down to hell to get that, or to the underworld to get that person, and kind of it doesn't really seem to ever work out well. So it didn't really work out well for Izanagi and Izanami. But in that story too, it was all about sort of the balance of creating and taking life too.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really interesting. This one doesn't seem to have like a greater moral.
It's not a big lesson there. It's
just a dope story.
Yeah.
That's like purely it. It was cool. My exposure to Tartarus, I think the word Tartarus was from Persona 5 a couple years ago. That's what they call like the place where you go to like to fight enemies. But it's a hellish place, and it's interesting to see it. I don't know, I'm wondering if an ancient Greek person, like if they like someone pushed them, they would have said, go to Tartarus. I wonder if it was, like, I wonder what it meant to them, in that way. And like, I think about the Norse underworld, or, the Norse ideas of that. And I say Norse, but it kind of goes on to other Germanic tribes too, but where it's basically you either die in battle with a sword in your hand, you go to Valhalla, and you're great for all of eternity, or you die any other way, and you're essentially just in Niflheim, where you're not like being punished, but you're just kind of like in the state of null. You're just nothing. And so it was just kind of like the only thing they feared was not going to Valhalla. And so I wonder if the Greeks, if there was this active fear of earning your way into Elysium, and I guess that would have to be by pleasing the gods and getting the fates happy, I guess.
I should go. Cammy, you might know this better than I, but again, in the Aeneid, when Aeneas first enters the underworld, he meets a lot of soldiers. Like, he recognizes a lot of soldiers who he served with, and they seem to have like their own section of the underworld, and they're still like behaving like soldiers. Like, they're still like in regiments, and they're still kind of organized, and they're still military men. So, do you know anything about that, Cammy? About
I think like you still plow the fields there too. I mean,
you just keep doing the same job that you.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Like I did do like a huge like research paper on it was really on Dionysus and his relationship to Jesus, because they're very similar in a lot of ways. And early on in like Greek and Roman, and this is memory, this isn't like I've researched this, but I mean I did research it, but I this is remembering the research from 10 years ago or whatever. But no, so basically like the Elysian fields and all that stuff, that was later added. It wasn't something that was an early Greek, like sort of ancient Greek.
Yeah, I think I've come across that too.
Yeah, so they started believing that maybe, I'm not sure when it was, honestly, but like that, maybe that time period where it was like the turn, like, so it's not BCE anymore, it's CE now, like maybe that time period. I'm not really sure though. I don't know when it started. I know that there were a lot of the festivals to Dionysus and stuff like that, kind of played into how they viewed that kind of thing. And also, when the cults of Isis started popping up, that's when you really saw the idea of like heaven, and you have a place to go when you die, because everybody sort of at first when you died, you went to you kind of, I mean, I guess it was Tartarus. I don't know they used to just call it Hades, I think.
Mhm.
But you went to this
Sure.
place
Or
and
dis.
yeah, Dis, yeah, something. And then so you went to this place and you lost all your memory. Like you were just in this river of souls basically, and there was nothing. But then when the ISIS cult started popping up, the idea of a salvation, of a you can live a good life here and then have a good afterlife as a reward
Mhm.
started popping up. And that, I don't know the time period though. Like I could not tell you what time period that
Yeah,
was.
I did a quick little look up, and that's Homer. I think is one of the earliest references, um, specifically talking of it and where it is at the edge of uh the ocean, basically the edge of the world. And it looks like that. Yeah, what you do, what you did in life, essentially. And there's references in antiquity to that. That's what you do. You just whatever you did in real life, you do it again happily, um, and move
Yeah,
on.
you just
So
kind of continue the same process. Like you,
right,
if you were a farmer, then you plowed the field.
right, yeah. Um, there's a lot there too. We could do a whole episode on that. um,
It is really interesting. And I mean, even like the Dionysus versus Jesus thing, like that was really, really interesting.
sure, yeah, yeah,
There's so many, just so many parallels between the two.
yeah.
Or I guess Bacchus for this reading because we're talking about Ovid.
Right, right, yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, I like that. It's just interesting. Reading like it says like it was more like a it wasn't originally it was separate from Hades, but then it was kind of Virgil's Aeneid specifically put it as a part of the Hades, part of the underworld, a section. Um, so I guess yeah, it's interesting where the underworld is, where the afterlife is. Like,
Mhm.
if Elysium is at the end of the ocean, could you believe that you would sail to it? If you could make it, but is it worth it? Did some guy go, I'm just gonna go for it? Like, I'm not waiting any longer. I'm just gonna head down there. Especially because I mean, you'd be granted immortality. Basically, it was almost like Valhalla in a way. You would be chosen to live and do whatever you wanted to forever. But you would. I don't know if you necessarily died in that case if you went to Elysium. So interesting.
It is interesting. Like, I think, it's, growing up in a Christian culture, it's like, could you dig into the ground and find a path to hell? It's not really part of our of our day-to-day discussions, but in the Greek world, like there are landmarks. Like I referenced a bunch of them in my story, where you know historically people believe that like this crater, this Avernus crater, was a gateway, and people I imagine maybe went there and did dug around and looked for it. um, I think that's really interesting that there was a physical geography to it that was very real to a lot of people. And
Yeah.
as people who grew up in a Christian culture, it's much more nebulous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of like a plane you can't get to until you're dead.
Hmm. Hmm.
Only the spirit can transfer to that place. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I doubt many like lay Greeks were going out there like looking, you know, for it
Right.
or anything.
Yeah.
But I mean, it kind of reminds me of the Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, where he ends up
Oh
just
yeah.
yeah topsy turvy or whatever.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's an interesting way to think of it. Yeah. Um. No. Yeah. That's it. It's pretty interesting. Like I said, there's some really cool academic pieces that really kind of delve into it, and the Greek sort of views on the afterlife have heavily influenced Christianity and even the modern Greek way of sort of thinking of life and death. But it's definitely changed too, though. It's just interesting for how many centuries that's how it was, where it was a being and a place, and the way we think of it, and who is in charge of it, and stuff like that, or at least for the Greeks, and how then that transferred to the Romans and went on from there. So and how it influenced Christianity from that point too.
Absolutely.
And how it influences us today
Yeah.
through Christianity and that sort
Mhm.
of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent, guys. Well, I think that about wraps it up, unless someone else wants to pull out something else.
I think that puts a really nice bow on it. Nice wrap up.
Yeah. Well,
I do want to give a little shout out. Peter is doing on Monday nights at 9 p.m. The Mythstorie After Dark. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. It's on our Facebook page,
yeah.
which is just Mythstorie. Just type it in. It's with an IE. You found the podcast, so you know how to spell it, and just do a little search and
Yeah.
add it. And we'll definitely like add you to the group and everything, and then you can watch those as well. And I
Yeah.
think we're trying to put them up on YouTube. Is that right, Peter?
Yes, I'm getting much better about recording them on my phone. Some of them have been quite long and they just don't fit on my phone. But I've been
Right.
trying to make my reading shorter. What I do is I read some of the primary sources that we base our scripts and our analysis on here. So I've been trying to keep them a little shorter so they're easier to record, and I'll throw them up on YouTube as well.
Yeah. We should be able to do that. We're trying to get more on YouTube, just working out some of the kinks behind it. But yeah, it should work out pretty well eventually soon. Well, guys, thanks Peter again for joining us. Cammy, you kind of have to be here, so that's it. Thank you. No, it was really great work today, guys. I really appreciate listening about that. So, if you have any suggestions, like there's the Facebook group, but you can also email us mystery with an IE at gmail.com is a great way to reach us too. But Facebook works really well, and you can hit any of us right on the page. So please hit us up if you would like to contact us. Well, Peter, thanks. Cammy, thanks. We'll see you next time.
Oh.
Hellhound.